In our valley, the elders don't love their children. They use them. My name is Aria. I was a low-ranked mage born into a family of powerful shadow witches. But my own magic was weak. To the High Coven, a mage without strong power is just a servant. They made me work the graveyard fields, digging up the skeletons of dead mages to harvest the residual magic left in their bones. Then came the night of the blood moon. The High Elders needed a massive surge of raw energy to renew their own youth. They didn't use an animal. They chose me. I remember the heavy iron chains pinning me to the stone altar. I remember High Priestess Morrigan driving an obsidian dagger into my chest, draining my life into the central well. I died in the dark, screaming, while the elders laughed. But my soul didn't pass over. The graveyard dirt had changed me. The old bones I had spent years digging up had left a dark, protective curse in my blood. The magic rejected my death and threw me back in time, right to the morning of that final day. When I woke on my dirt mat, breathing hard, I didn't cry. I didn't try to run away from the valley. I looked at my hands and I made a promise. This time, I am not the sacrifice. I am the executioner. Our small stone hut sat at the edge of the deadwoods. There were 3 of us: me, the girl who returned, my brother Julian, a massive blacksmith who forged the Coven's ritual irons, and my sister, Sable, a witch whose dark magic was a rotting curse that forced her to keep her arms wrapped in thick bandages. I told them what was coming tonight. They didn't ask questions. In our family, we knew how cruel the elders could be. "We need the blood of an elder to open the temple vault tonight," I whispered, looking out the grime-covered window. "Elder Marcus is at the graveyard right now, inspecting the bone harvest. We take him, we take his blood, and we poison the black well before the ritual can begin." Julian grabbed his heavy iron blacksmith hammer. Sable tightened the salted rags on her arms. An hour later, under a thick fog, we tracked Marcus to the deep crypts. He wasn't helpless. He was in the middle of casting. His silver staff glowed with a sickening green light as he used his magic to rip open a stone mausoleum, physically pulling the glowing bone dust out of the old graves. We had to be precise. If he saw us, one blast of his shadow magic would turn our blood to ice. Julian created the distraction. He threw a heavy iron anvil block against a nearby tombstone. The loud clang shattered the silence. Marcus spun around, his green staff flare lighting up the fog. "Who's there? Show yourself." That was our only window. I lunged from behind a stone angel, tackling Marcus around his waist to pull him away from his staff. We hit the muddy earth hard. Marcus roared in fury, his bare hands lighting up with dark purple sparks as he clawed at my face, his fingernails cutting deep gashes into my cheek. "Low-born filth," he shrieked, his magic beginning to choke the air out of my lungs. He almost overpowered me, but Sable rushed into the mud. She tore the bandages off her right arm, exposing the black pulsing sores of her rotting curse. She didn't just grab the staff. She drove her bare, bleeding palms directly onto Marcus's face. Her curse surged, a blast of purple rot freezing Marcus's jaw so he couldn't call his guards, his skin blistering under her touch. Julian finished it. He stepped over us and swung the flat side of his heavy iron hammer, striking Marcus hard across the knee. The bone shattered, and the elder collapsed into the mud, pinned. I knelt over him, panting, my face bleeding. I drew a small knife and sliced his palm, catching his thick, dark elder blood in a glass vial. But as I finished, I looked down at Marcus. The rot from Sable's hands was wearing off, and his eyes were wide with pure vengeance. If we left him alive, the guards would be on us before we crossed the ridge. I placed my bare hand over his heart, reaching for the cold void magic inside my soul. I pulled. The green magic inside Marcus reversed, rushing into my hand like ice water. His body withered, turning gray and shrinking into a dry husk within seconds. "We have the blood," I gasped, standing up. But suddenly, a blinding red beam of light shot straight out of Marcus's shattering staff, rocketing high into the night sky. It exploded like thunder, illuminating the entire valley. Julian's face went pale under the red glare. The death flare. The coven knows an elder just died. The temple bells began to wail across the valley, a loud, rhythmic iron scream. "Intruders in the graveyard!" a voice boomed from the distance, followed by the terrifying deep baying of coven hounds. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted into the dead woods, the black branches scratching at our faces. The fog was thick, but behind us, the woods lit up with the green fire of torches. 5 coven enforcers, riding massive black hounds, crashed through the brush. They were shouting spells, sending bolts of green plasma tearing through the trees, exploding the trunks into splinters. A hound leapt through the air, its jaws snapping inches from my neck. Julian spun around, his massive frame anchoring into the mud. He caught the beast by its leather collar, roared, and slammed it directly into the path of an oncoming horse's rider. The horse tripped, throwing the rider onto the jagged rocks. 2 more enforcers blocked our path ahead, their hands glowing with green fire magic. "Surrender the murderer!" one screamed, throwing a ball of fire at Julian. "Death to the Elder Slayer!" Sable rushed to the front. She threw her bare, rotted arms wide open, letting her cursed magic burst outward in a massive, violent wave of purple rot. The green fire was swallowed by the black decay. The spell hit the 2 enforcers, instantly rusting their metal chest plates and causing their skin to blister. They fell to the ground, clawing at their faces in agony. But more torches were appearing through the trees. The entire coven was mobilizing. "We can't fight the whole valley out here," I yelled, pulling Sable along as her arms began to bleed from the strain of her curse. "The temple, they're looking for us in the woods, which means the temple gates are lightly guarded. We go straight into the jaws of the beast." We bypassed the main courtyard, slipping through the lower drainage tunnels beneath the high temple. Julian was carrying a heavy leather sack packed with 40 pounds of black salt iron powder, a forbidden, volatile metal he had mined from the old ruins. We reached the iron doors of the inner vault. The lock was a stone face with its mouth open. I poured Marcus's blood into it. The door groaned and swung open. But the coven wasn't stupid. The moment our boots touched the floor inside, the security traps triggered. The stone walls began to weep a sizzling yellow acid. It hit the floor and pooled instantly, eating through the thick leather soles of our boots. I screamed as the liquid fire touched my bare skin, smoke rising from my ankles. Before we could back out, thick shadow tendrils shot down from the ceiling like coiled ropes, wrapping tightly around Julian's throat. The tendrils squeezed, lifting his massive 300-pound frame completely off the ground. Julian gasped, his face turning purple as he clawed fruitlessly at the darkness, his iron hammer dropping to the floor with a heavy clang. "Julian!" Sable cried. She dashed forward through the pooling acid, her feet sizzling as she ignored the pain. She wrapped her bare, bleeding hands around the black tendrils. The rot in her blood clashed violently with the shadow defense, causing small, rapid explosions that scorched her arms and tore her skin open. She groaned through gritted teeth, pulling with everything she had until the shadows snapped, dropping Julian crashing to the stone floor, wheezing and drawing ragged breaths. Suddenly, the heavy iron vault doors behind us slammed shut, locking us in. 3 elite vault guards stepped out of the shadows, their armor polished to a mirrored shine, their longswords crackling with green lightning. "You trapped yourselves in a tomb, rats," the leader hissed. The guards lunged. Julian barely scrambled to his knee, raising his hammer just in time to block a lightning blade. A massive shower of sparks blinded the room, Julian's shoulder muscles tearing under the immense physical pressure of the guard's magic. I rushed the second guard. He thrust his silver sword straight at my chest, but I didn't dodge. I leaned into it. The blade pierced directly through my left shoulder, popping the joint and slicing through muscle. The white-hot pain nearly made me faint, but I used that exact split second to pin his weapon arms down and grab his bare face with both hands. I channeled the void, my magic. I pulled. The guard's eyes went dark as his life force rushed into my bloody palms, leaving him a dry, hollow shell that collapsed under the weight of his own armor. Sable tackle-slammed the third guard, unleashing the absolute last of her energy, forcing her rotting magic directly into his chest plate until the heavy metal rusted, shattered, and caved inward. Julian finished the first guard, swinging his hammer in a brutal upward arc that shattered the man against the stone wall. We were completely broken. I was clutching my left shoulder, my arm hanging completely limp and useless, blood pouring down my chest. Sable was slumped against a pillar, her arms a raw, bleeding mess, her breathing shallow. We were all coughing violently from the rising acid fumes. "Julian," I choked out, my vision blurring. "The bag! I can't lift it." Julian nodded, his throat bruised black from the tendrils. He dragged himself over to the heavy leather sack, his muscles trembling. With a guttural roar, he hoisted the 40 pounds of black salt iron powder and dumped it directly into the black well, the massive, pulsing liquid dark magic in the center of the temple that fed the entire upper temple above. The well hissed violently, turning from a deep glowing green to a putrid, bubbling gray. The magic was infected. Above us, the chanting was reaching a frenzy. We dragged ourselves up the spiral stone stairs, Julian pushing the heavy doors open as I stumbled behind, my limp arm tightly pressed against my ribs to stop the bleeding. We burst straight into the great hall. The scene was absolute madness. The remaining 29 elders stood around the stone altar in a perfect circle, their white robes stark against the dark stone. Because they hadn't caught me, they had dragged a young, terrified, low-born servant boy to the altar. He was pinned down by heavy iron chains, weeping, his eyes searching the crowd of thousands of silent, terrified, low-born mages and slaves who stood around the perimeter of the room, forced to watch. High Priestess Moradin stood over the boy, her long silver hair flying wildly in the arcane wind, raising her polished obsidian dagger high. "The blood moon is full!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Receive the power!" She slammed her heavy silver staff into the floor, a command to draw the fresh magic up from the black well below. "Morrigan!" I roared, my voice cracking with pain and rage. The elders gasped, their chanting abruptly stopping. Thousands of heads turned in unison to look at us, 3 bloody, limping ghosts covered in acid burns and soot, refusing to die. The crowd of low-born servants murmured, a sudden tense electricity snapping through the room. But it was already too late for the coven. The poisoned gray magic had already rushed up the stone pipes into the altar. The moment the salt iron mixture hit the elder's staves, it didn't grant youth. It triggered a violent, catastrophic reaction. The staves didn't glow, they exploded. Jagged shards of silver, wood, and stone flew through the air like shrapnel. Morrigan shrieked as the gray, corrosive energy crawled up her arms like living mold. Her beautiful, youthful skin instantly withered, wrinkling, drying, and aging 40 years in a single second. Her long, silver hair fell out in heavy clumps onto the stone floor. The other 29 elders fell to their knees, clutching their chests and vomiting black bile as the poisoned gray magic turned inward, boiling their internal organs. The power they had stolen from thousands of sacrificed children for centuries was now consuming them from the inside out. They collapsed, their bodies turning to ash inside their own white robes. The great hall fell into a sudden dead silence. The gods were dead. The 30 remaining temple guards panicked, drawing their swords. But they weren't looking at us. They were looking at the crowd. The thousands of low-born mages and slaves looked at the ash on the floor, then at the bleeding elders, and finally at their own hands. The fear that had kept them broken for generations vanished in a heartbeat. A collective roaring howl erupted from the crowd. It wasn't a riot. It was an execution. They ripped their iron chains directly out of the stone walls, turning them into weapons. They swarmed the guards, pulling them off their platforms, overpowering the weapons with sheer, overwhelming numbers. I walked up the altar steps, my boots leaving bloody prints, stepping over the groaning, ancient body of Morrigan. I used my right hand to unhitch the iron chains from the terrified servant boy and helped him stand. I picked up the dropped obsidian dagger from the altar, looking down at the shivering, helpless priestess. I told you once that our lives belonged to the Coven, I whispered, tossing the dagger onto her ruined, ash-covered robes. Look around, Morrigan. The Coven is dead. By dawn, the High Temple was a silent, smoking ruin of black stone. The heavy scent of sulfur and ash filled the air, but the valley was completely quiet. The three of us stood on the broken stone steps, looking out at the thousands of low-born mages who were finally free. The red sky was gone, replaced by a fresh, clear morning sun that warmed my face. Julian sat on a broken pillar, slowly wrapping a clean cloth around his bruised neck, his eyes fixed on his heavy blacksmith hammer. His hands were raw, but they were steady. Sable stood beside him, slowly unwrapping her arms. With the destruction of the black well, the dark magic source was gone. The purple sores on her skin had stopped bleeding, turning into clean, smooth, non-infectious scars. For the first time in her life, she was finally healing. I kept my left hand tucked into my belt, my shoulder bound tightly in torn cloth. It would take months to heal, maybe it never would fully, but the pain felt real. It felt alive. The people want to know who will rule the valley now, Aria, Julian said, looking out at the massive crowd gathering at the base of the steps. I looked back at the deep, ruined pit where the black well used to pulse with stolen lives. Nobody rules, I said, my voice carrying over the quiet courtyard. We are going to fill the well with rocks and bury it under 10 feet of dirt. If you want magic in this valley, you dig it out of the ground with your own hands. No more masters, no more sacrifices. The crowd began to cheer, a loud, beautiful, chaotic sound that the valley hadn't heard in hundreds of years. The first time I died, I was just a girl, screaming in the dark, waiting for a knife. This time, we let the coven burn, and we built a world of our own.